Welcome back to another exciting project, where we'll continue learning and building creative web elements step by step. In this project, we're going to design and create a fully functional analog clock from scratch. As you can see from the final version of the project, our clock features a sleek design with the Rolex logo in the center, displaying the current time in real time directly from the browser. We're going to use JavaScript to dynamically retrieve the current time from the system and then convert those values into rotational degrees, allowing the hour, minute, and second hands to move smoothly just like a real clock. In the next section, we're going to begin by creating the HTML structure, which will serve as the foundation for our analog clock project. So, I'll see you in the next section, where we start building this elegant and functional analog clock together. Let's begin building our project. I will keep this final version open as a reference point. Now, I open Visual Studio Code. Then, close the Get Started tab, and from the File menu, select Open Folder. Let's make a new folder for our project. I will place this project on my desktop, but feel free to store it wherever you prefer on your system. To begin, I will create a new folder, naming it Clock, and then select it by clicking Select Folder. Next, close the Get Started tab, and in the Explorer on the left, let's create an index.html file. We can simply click here, or right-click and select New File. We simply name it index.html. This empty HTML file can be quickly populated with an HTML boilerplate using an exclamation mark and emit, which generates the doc type declaring the HTML version, typically HTML5 for modern pages. Following this, we find the HTML tag, which encloses all content, and its lang attribute defaults to English, setting the page's language. Following this, we introduce the head section, which contains essential meta tags and the page's title. Beginning with the first meta tag, it sets the character set, and for HTML5, UTF-8 is the recommended encoding. The compatibility meta tag instructs Internet Explorer to utilize its most recent rendering engine, Edge. Following this, we find the viewport meta tag, which tells the browser how to resize the page. For instance, we set the device width to equal the screen's width, and the initial zoom level to 100%. After that, we have the title tag, which appears in your Browsers tab. Let's open the browser to see our progress. For this, I employ a convenient extension called Live Server, which is completely free. A single click here will launch your project, and every time you save, the changes will instantly appear. Presently, the title displayed the word Document. Let's arrange our browser on the right and our code on the left. We can now hide the sidebar with Ctrl-B. Let's update the browser tab title to Clock. We can now see this change directly within the tab. Taking a look at the final version, you can see the body background uses salmon color. Next, we will add a container for our clock, which we will call Clock. Therefore, we need to add a div element inside the body, assigning it the class Clock. Within this container, we will include the numbers 9, 12, 3, and 6. Next, we have the hands for the second, minute, and hour. We will also include the Rolex logo. There are 3 elements we need to add inside this div. The first div element will contain our numbers. We will add a div with a class of numbers. Within this div, we'll place our numbers. We'll create one div for example, the number 12. We simply type the number 12. Upon checking our reference, you should see the number 12. Let's duplicate this 3 more times using Alt-Shift-Down arrow. This duplicates the div 3 times. The next number is 3. The next number will be 6. And the last number we need is 9. Our next step is to add the clock hands. Next, we'll create a div that covers all the clock hands and name it arrows. Within this division, we'll create a dedicated division for the hour hand. We can then duplicate this 2 more times with Alt-Shift down. The second hand is for the minutes. The final hand will represent the seconds. To complete our design, let's incorporate the Rolex logo. Let's search for Rolex on Google. Our next step is exploring the images. We will use the tools to filter by transparent color. We need to refine our search to Rolex logo, since it is presently displaying only watches. The first result is from Wikipedia. Let's select this first result. You can see that this image has a transparent background. Therefore, we can simply copy this by right-clicking and selecting Copy Image Address. We no longer need this window open. Let's rearrange our windows once more. After this div, we will add an image tag, and for the image source, we paste the link we just copied. With that, the Rolex image should now appear. However, as you can see, it is quite large, but we will style it later with CSS. For now, we will leave it as is, and for the alt text, we will simply say Rolex logo. With that, our HTML structure for the project is complete. In the next section, we will begin styling the project with CSS. In the previous section, we finished building the HTML structure of our project. Let's dive into styling our project with CSS. First off, let's create a new CSS file. To begin, open the Explorer section with Ctrl-Shift-E, then create a new file named style.css. We now have the style sheet, but to link it properly, we need to add a reference to this file within our HTML. Inside the HTML file, right after the title and before the closing head tag, we will add a link tag. When we type the word link, then choose the third auto-suggestion, which includes CSS. Here, the link tag connects our HTML to the external style sheet, where rel specifies the relationship and href points to the style.css file in the same folder as index.html. Our next step is to style our page. To make this change, head over to the style.css file, then close the Explorer section using Ctrl-B. With that ready, let's begin. Let's begin by focusing on the body section. To begin, we'll remove the default margin and padding. To ensure consistent spacing, we will set both the padding and margin to 0. Notice these elements are now closely aligned with the wall. Next, we will reduce the Rolex's logo size to improve visibility. Before continuing with the main body, let's add the image element. With the image in place, it looks much better already. Moving on, let's focus on the body section. To make the background of our body section really pop, let's set it to a lovely salmon color. Next, we'll set the font family across our website to Cursive New. Next, we will set the height to fill the entire viewport. With that in place, we can visually center everything by simply changing the display property to flex. Next, we will center the content using Justify Content Center. They are now centered horizontally, but for perfect vertical alignment, we must set Align Items to Center. With the main body section complete, let's now implement the clock's functionality. The rounded gray clock in the final version is actually the div with a class of clock covering everything. However, we must style this element first and shape it into a perfect circle. We target the clock class with a dot, since it's a class selector, and now assign a width and height to it. Before adjusting the width and height, let's update the background color, making the change visible. The background has a light gray color. You'll notice it appears as a small square. With that in mind, let's adjust the width to 350 pixels and set the height to 350 pixels too. To make it perfectly round, we'll set the border radius to 50%. We also added some border and shadow effects for a subtle 3D look. Let's give it a border with a width of 5 pixels. We set the border style to solid, but it defaults to black, so let's change that to dark gray instead. I'm simply changing its color to a dark gray. Furthermore, let us add the shadow effect. To create this shadow effect, we simply add the box shadow property. We will add a box shadow with 1 pixel for the horizontal offset, 1 pixel for the vertical offset, and a 4 pixel blur radius. As you can see right now, the shadow appears completely dark. However, I prefer the shadow not to look so dark. I'd like the shadow in pure black with around 70% transparency. For the black color in the shadow, we set the RGB values to 0, 0, and 0. Regarding the alpha value for transparency, we assign it 0.7, which equals 70%. With that complete, we finish styling the clock. With the clock styled, let's add the Rolex logo inside it. To properly position this Rolex here, we need to set its position to absolute relative to its parent, which is the clock. To position the Rolex logo inside the clock effectively, we must first set the clock's position to relative. Let's set the clock's position to relative, and then position this logo absolute. This setup lets us place the logo precisely where it belongs. For example, if we aim for the center, we simply state left 50%. This positions the edge right at the center, but to center it perfectly, I adjust the translate property. We need to apply the transform property using translate. Next, apply a CSS transform with translate and -50%. This adjustment places it perfectly in the center horizontally, while vertically we position it using top 50%. Let's adjust its size to 60 pixels for proper scaling. This size adjustment makes the logo fit perfectly. Additionally, let's set its z-index value to 2 for proper layering. This setup positions the clock as the base layer in our design. Next, we have the Rolex and the arrows. I also want those arrows positioned above the Rolex logo. To place those arrows above the Rolex logo, we set the z-index of this element to 2. Therefore, we assign the clock a z-index of 1. We also assign a z-index value to the numbers. The numbers need a z-index of 2 since they layer on top. We assign a z-index of 3 to the arrows and a z-index of 4 to the center circle. Take a moment to watch the seconds tick by and observe how the second hand moves over the logo. You'll notice the hand positioned beneath this circle. As you can see, the second hand passes behind it, making the logo appear firmly attached to the clock face. With the logo set, we begin positioning the numbers around the clock. We have 4 numbers in total. You will notice a div element with the class numbers, where each individual number also has its own distinct class. To begin targeting them, we select the numbers class first. For example, we style the numbers and the division elements. However, for their exact placement, we use their individual class. For instance, imagine the numbers 12, 9, 3, and 6 appearing in these positions. Let's go ahead and implement it that way. We target the numbers class and the div elements it contains. This way, we target all of them together. To begin, we should position them absolute, but relative to the clock. Our clock element has a relative position. First, we set their position to absolute. Next, let's adjust the font size to 27 pixels. Notice how all of the elements are stacked together, but later we're going to individually position them. Please bear with me for this part. To give it some visual pop, let's also make the font weight bold. This means we need to make it a little thicker. Next, we will refine the color scheme. For the color, I'll use a light golden reddish yellow. The color is a soft yellowish hue. Let's also enhance this element with a shadow effect. For the horizontal shadow, I specify 1 pixel. Apply 1 pixel for the vertical shadow and 2 pixels for the blur radius. For the color, we could use RGBA, setting it to black with 70% transparency. With that, this part is complete. Our next step involves addressing each number individually. Let's start by targeting the number 12 first. We simply type .12. What exactly did I just write, you might ask? We want the number 12 positioned right at the top. We will set the top position to 6 pixels and the left position to 50%. As mentioned earlier, this parameter brings the edge to the center. To perfectly center it, we use a transform with a translate of -50%. With that in mind, let's now move on. Let's copy this code now for the number 3. Alternatively, we could retype it. For the number 3, position it 6 pixels from the right edge. As you can see, it's now positioned 6 pixels from the right edge. Next, let's position it 50% from the top. However, this actually isn't 50%. To properly center the element, we add the transform translate adjustment. This simply translates the element along the x-axis. This property called translate x handles the horizontal shift. However, for the 3, this translates to a y-axis movement. To center it vertically, we use transform translate 50%. With the 3 positioned correctly, let's handle the 6 next. To place the 6 at the bottom, position it just 6 pixels away. Next, we use left 50% and transform translate x to -50%. And moving on, we have the number 9. The 9 should have a left value of 6 pixels. Next, we have this. It doesn't matter if it's from the top 50% or the bottom. We just say transform translate y -50%. Having correctly positioned all these numbers around the clock, we can proceed. With the numbers positioned around the clock, let's begin styling the hands. By the way, those handles actually refer to the clock hands. You can see that a div with the class of arrows contains each handle, each with its own class. First, we apply this method to all of them. We simply target the arrows div. We apply the common one, and then for particular one, we use their own classes. To center them properly, we target the arrows class directly. We simply use arrows for this. We wanted the arrows centered, so we simply set their display to flex. We also need to set both the width and height to 100%. To center it, we use justify content center. This centers the content horizontally, while align items handles vertical positioning. This setting easily centers the item perfectly. Right now, you cannot see them yet because those elements lack any defined size. To begin, we need to carefully position this circle. However, we haven't created a dedicated element for this circle yet. To achieve this, we can use the before pseudo class. For this pseudo element, we type .arrows before in the code. To create this pseudo element, start by adding an empty content property for the before pseudo class. Remember that you always include content with just an empty string. Next, we apply a width of 25 pixels. Let us check the display now. Unfortunately, the element remains invisible. To make the element visible, let's also set its height to 25 pixels. Next, we apply a dark green background color. With the updated color, the circle is now clearly visible. With display flex applied, it aligns perfectly in the center. To make it a perfect circle, simply set its border radius to 50%. Next, we'll add a subtle box shadow. For the vertical shadow, specify 1 pixel, and for the blur effect, use 2 pixels. Next, we'll use an RGB black with 70% transparency. This setup works perfectly now. As we discussed earlier, this z-index value should always be positioned above all other elements. Let's confirm the layering order here. The Rolex logo sits at Z index 2, the clock hands need 3, and the center circle gets 4. Moving forward, we need to target all the arrows. To achieve this, we directly target its div element. To better see the effect, let's add a width and change the background color. The background color should therefore be white, but you cannot spot them right now because they lack any size or dimensions. We should give each of them a width of 7 pixels. You see a little bit movement here. However, since we will position them next, their appearance will change soon. To position them properly, we first set the property to absolute, allowing the hands to extend outward without interfering with the center circle. Let us give them a height of 120 pixels. You can see the hands now, but they overlap completely in a stack. The handles are currently centered, but we want this one positioned here. Therefore, we must adjust the transform origin. We'll simply place the transform origin right at the bottom. Position the origin at the bottom center to rotate the hand from its base. As we mentioned earlier, we set it to bottom 50%. We position it 50% from the top. When we need to move it, it will shift from its bottom center. You will also observe the handle positioned beneath the Rolex logo. Our goal is to position it above this logo. To layer the hand above the logo, we set the Z index to 3. The logo appears above the circle because the circle has a Z index of 4, while the Rolex is set to 2. In addition, let's make this clock hand end a little sharper. To make it perfectly round, simply set the border radius property to 50%. Notice how we have 50% at the top and 50% at the bottom. However, what I really want is rounding only at the tip right here. To round only the tip, we set those values to 0 on the other sides. Next, let's enhance it with a stylish box shadow. Let's simply apply a box shadow. Actually, I want it exactly to be like this. We will now copy that and then paste it here. After applying the shadow, it appears a bit too intense here. We just changed this transparency value to 3. This is how it appears. With that in mind, let's adjust their positioning. To fix this, we will target the hour. To target the hour hand precisely, we use its class name in the style sheet. The goal was to make it smaller in width while keeping its height at 80 pixels. We will also rotate the hand slightly using the transform rotate property. We have rotated the hand by exactly 30 degrees. You can clearly see the hands positioned correctly now. Indeed, it's working perfectly. Let's move on to the next step now. Let's apply those same adjustments to the second hand. To achieve this, simply copy the code. In the copied code, replace hour with second to target the hand. For the second hand, we adjust the height differently. We'll maintain the identical height for this hand. And this one we rotated for 250 degrees. Regarding the height, we don't actually need to specify one for the second element. We set its background color to a vibrant goldenrod. You will notice the color doesn't change. The functionality is good, but the background color remains unchanged. Let's target the second hand in the same way as the arrows. This now correctly targets the element because we need to overwrite its existing classes. Therefore, we must specifically target them. We also apply this to the hour. With the hour now properly scaled, our display looks much better. At this point, the styling looks completely finished. This completes our CSS styling, giving the clock its final visual look. To make the watch function correctly and match our computer's exact time. As you can see, this value is close to 12. But notice that it now matches my computer's exact time. Moving forward, we will employ JavaScript to retrieve computer information dynamically. With this information, we will adjust the placement of the seconds, hours, and minutes. This watch displays the precise time synchronized with your computer's clock. Let's dive into the JavaScript part of our project. We've just finished styling our project with CSS in the previous section. Now that we've styled our project with CSS, let's begin incorporating JavaScript to add exciting functionality. Our goal is to retrieve the current date and time from the browser and then convert the time components, such as seconds, minutes, and hours, into degrees for our clock. The first thing we need to do is create a JavaScript file. To create the JavaScript file, let's open the Explorer section by pressing Ctrl and B, and then, on the left side, right-click and select New File. Let's go ahead and create a file named index.js. To effectively use this file, we must link it within our HTML. To begin, inside the index.html file, just before the closing body tag, we will add a script tag. Let's type sc and select the second autocomplete option, the script tag, with the src attribute. The src attribute specifies the location of our JavaScript file. Let's simply type index.js to reference our file. With JavaScript now set up and ready, let's grab those important elements to make things happen. Let's retrieve a few essential elements. To begin, we need to get the hour, minute, and second elements. To select these, we can use the query selector method. Let's declare a constant, naming it hour element. Assign it to the document object using the query selector method. For the selector, add a dot before hour since it's selecting a div by its class name. To free up more screen space, let's close the Explorer panel. Next, conveniently duplicate this line 2 more times using Alt-Shift-Down. A neat trick to select both instances is by using Ctrl+D. This selected line will represent the second element. With our elements now selected, we can proceed. To better understand this process, let's add a console.log statement. To illustrate, let's simply console log our element. At this point, open your browser's developer console by pressing F12 and navigate to the console tab. As you can see, the element with an hour class is returned. We want to update this div element using the current time from the browser. However, to update the information, we need to fetch it every second since the browser provides static data. Let me demonstrate that approach for you right away. To begin, let's create a function we'll call updateClock and execute it once here. A primary objective here is to capture the current time or date. To determine the current time, we can simply use newDate. By creating a new date, we obtain an object that captures the current moment, storing it in our current date variable. To better understand this process, let's add a console.log statement. At this point, we are retrieving both the date and the time, but the output is simply a string. Specifically, we care about the hour, minute, and second. Observe the output, which is now 8:36:27. Try refreshing the page yourself, and notice how that value changes with each new request we make. We have 2 methods for getting it every second. One of these methods is the setTimeout method, and the other one is setInterval method. Let's try implementing the setTimeout method. Let's begin by typing setTimeout into the code. The setTimeout method takes 2 arguments. The first of these is a function. We will use an arrow function, and the delay specified will trigger this function's execution. Since we're calling this function, there's no need to create a new one. We just put the function's name here. Observe in the console how the current date and time update every second. Right now, we are particularly interested in the hour, minute, and second. For instance, to retrieve only the hour value, let's simply add a method here and call it getHours. This method retrieves the current hour value. To retrieve values like minutes or seconds, you can simply use getMinutes or getSeconds. In this example, our indices are 3, 4, 5, and 6. With these approaches, we can get all 3 things. Therefore, instead of console logging, we simply create a constant and name it, for example, hour. this constant equals currentDate.getHours. Let's duplicate this line 2 more times using Alt-Shift and the down arrow key. And this is going to be minutes. And this should be capital, and this is going to be seconds. At this point, we're capturing all three, hours, minutes, and seconds. To better understand this process, let's add a console.log statement. We are retrieving the hour, the minute, and also the second. So that is okay, but our clock is analog. So we need to convert these things to a degree. Let's change the hours to degrees. Let's declare a constant for our degree calculation. To convert it to a 12-hour format, we simply divide the hour by 12. To convert this value to a full rotation, we multiply it by 360 degrees, as a circle contains 360 degrees. To make this hour visible in our clock, we must adjust its style. Recall that within the style, we applied a transform to rotate it either 30 or 250 degrees. For instance, if the rotation is 30 degrees, it positions here, but if it's 60 degrees, it moves over to this spot. Now we want to change this one dynamically using JavaScript here. To achieve this, we will target our hour element and change its style's transform property, because here we are applying a rotate function. Since this part is dynamic, we need to use backticks for variable inclusion. Next, we simply specify rotate and use a dynamic variable such as hour degree appending deg, which stands for degrees. At this moment, our hour is 8. Following the same logic, we need to apply this for the minutes and seconds as well. Duplicating this line twice, we then change hour to minutes, and since there are 60 minutes in an hour, the value should be 60 instead of 12. Following the minutes, apply the same adjustment to seconds by replacing the name and using 60 as the divisor. The timing now functions perfectly, showing the current time on my computer. Another approach I mentioned earlier involves using setInterval instead of setTimeout. Let me comment out this direct function call right here. Now we can implement setInterval to run the update clock every single second. This will achieve exactly the same continuous update effect. That concludes our project for today, and I hope you enjoyed the journey while picking up some useful skills along the way. Looking forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.